third session, the second of today. And who says business registers says actually administrative data in the same breath. Administrative data are useful and necessary for establishing a statistical business register, for quality management, etc. But they also provide very useful and valuable information for statisticians, especially when the data are coupled to the business register. So there is a wide variety of themes when it comes to administrative data, and that is reflected in today's contribution of this session. We have two presentations from GLIVE, linking national business registers to international, for international cooperation and connecting the corporate dots. The use of administrative data for economic restructuring is dealt with the representative of France. And apparently, I think that the member of Lesotho is not presenting. And then we have finally a topic by SFO who will address the macro data linking for macroeconomic use. So the first presenter will be Rico Dunn from the GLIVE.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very glad to be here and to talk to you about business registries. I have a very long history in the Dutch business registry, which is what you call the administrative business register, what we call the business register. So sometimes it's very confusing for me, especially when I heard about this Wiesbaden group for the first time. I have quite a more than 10 years experience in all kinds of international cooperation between business registers. And then I found out there was this international group on business registers, which I never heard of. But then it turned out that this is the statistical side of the business registers instead of the administrative side. So I'd like to take you on a little bit of a tour of what you call the administrative business registries, but which, while in my presentation, I presume I'll stick to business registries in general, to explain a few things, how the different business registries work and how their international cooperation works, and some relevant topics for the connection between these registries and the GLIVE. I'd like to start with a couple of slides on business registries in general. First of all, some similarities, and after this, a couple of slides actually on the differences between the registries. As you all know, of course, there is, you can say that there is a business register in every country, and that the basic content is usually the same. I mean, you will find companies registered in such a registration. You will find a unique identifier most of the times in such a registry. The address, the legal form, the officers of a company to be able to identify people who have the authority to act on behalf of the company. Also, it is usually the case that it is the responsibility of the organization itself to keep its data up to date. And you will find different ways of having legislation on the registration and the functioning of the registry itself, but there will be legislation always behind such a register. And the whole bottom line idea of having such a registry is to have transparency on legal persons and the natural persons behind it. I would say that by far the majority of the questions why people look at a business register is to find out, if you're doing business with a company, who has the authority to represent the company to put a signature on your contract. And from a legal perspective, the registry can be trusted. I'm going to say a little bit more about it later, but the bottom line of that is that legislation has stipulated that everybody who looks at the register can trust the information from the register unless you know it's not true. Then some differences. You will find very different types of organizations in the different countries really managing the registry. In many countries you will find a government agency an agency connected directly to a ministry which manages the business register in that country. There are a few countries, under which the Netherlands is one, where the Chamber of Commerce, which is then a public institution established by law, will run the register. France and Germany have the courts, or at least the greffier in France, the administrative parts of the courts which run the register as such. Usually in the US you will find the Secretary of State, a corporate division or something like that of the Secretary of State of each state to run the register. Australia and Jersey, you will find the registry at the financial regulator, the Financial Services Commission. You also have a funny situation in, for example, Gibraltar and the Canadian province of Saskatchewan, where there is a commercial company which has a license to run the register. And here in Switzerland, but also in France, the statistical offices are directly involved in the process of the registration of companies because they they issue the unique number for a company. Also, you'll find a difference in which ministry in each country is responsible for the register. Usually it's justice or something like economic affairs or whatever it's called in a country. Sometimes even something else, but these are the two major ones where you'll find the responsibility for the registry. You could say two different possibilities or schemes in how legislation is organized around the business registry. First of all, you will see countries like the UK and many of the Commonwealth countries where there is a Single Companies Act which regulates everything around establishing companies, the registration you have to do, the functioning of the registration authority, etc. In other countries you will find separate types of legislation for the three different items I was just mentioning, which are then regulated in different types of legislation. For example, in many civil law countries you will find the establishing of companies itself in something like the civil code or something like that. More differences. Which types of organizations are registered? You have company business registries which only register companies, like limited liability companies. And you have registries where you will find many other types of organizations, such as sole traders, foundations, associations, professionals, etc., to be in the registry. But that's on a national level, these differences you will find from country to country. Is there only the obligation to keep your data up to date yourself, or is there also a kind of annual verification? For example, again, until recently in the UK, Ireland, but also in many other Commonwealth countries, you would have the so-called annual return, where you have to verify your data and file them again, plus your annual accounts, your financial accounts actually. And annual accounts is something which is usually also, which are usually filed also at the registry, but not in all cases. For example, Belgium is always a good example, where you have the registry in one organization and the financial accounts have to be filed at the National Bank in Belgium. Quite a few different funding models as well for the registries. You can find registries which are fully funded by the government, just an annual fee in fact to run the entire operation. You will find registries where the registered organizations pay itself, either an initial fee for the initial registration and or, can happen both, an annual fee to be on the register as well. Thirdly, in many companies' registers, you will find rates if you want to use the information from the registry. So the users of the information also pay for the registry. And in many countries, you will find like a mixed model of all three of these different types of fundings. And it also is very different between the different countries, whether or not such a registry really has a separate budget of itself or is fully incorporated in a budget of the ministry, under which it functions. A third slide with differences. Dissemination of the registry information. I would say that the information from the registry is always public information, because that is the bottom line idea, to give everybody the possibility to look at the data. It differs how much information is available, and nowadays it very much also differs via which channels information is available. We have, of course, especially the last couple of years, the growing of the ideas behind the open data movement, which is not only open but also free. There are now several countries, and if I look in Europe, it's at least UK, Belgium and Denmark, where you can more or less obtain all the basic information from the registry for free. But in many other countries it is still paid information. I do expect that many more countries will move towards free data. But I mean, it's in the end a discussion about money, of course, because you have to run your registry. If you sell information on an annual basis for like 50 million, the ministry has to come back, and if they decide that the registry will contain open and free data for the future, they have to do something financially to make that possible, of course. In some countries you do see restrictions on the reuse of data, where you cannot use it more than once, for example. And also there are a few countries where the information from the registry is not available directly from the registry itself, but only via appointed service providers. And they have like a license agreement then with the registry to be able to disseminate the information. How about the government use? I mean, many government organizations, as we've seen already this morning, use the information from all different registries in their own processes, which also sometimes is for free and sometimes you have to pay for it even within the government. I remember very well in the Netherlands we have only one exception for organizations who have to pay for, everybody has to pay for the information from the registry, except the statistical organization since like 10 years or something. And that's the only exception. For the rest, the rest of the government just pays for it as well. An important development, I would say, also on an international level, at least at the European level, is the once only principle, where many registries are connected to other parts of government. And the bottom line idea is that you ask all the same information only once from citizens and companies, organizations, and you have to reuse that information within the government to diminish the administrative burdens for companies and citizens as well. Which also means that, for example, if the tax office comes to a company and asks for data which are already available in the business register, you can just tell them, this is my number in the registry, go get it there, I'm not going to give it to you. And that is allowed. To say something about the background of the business registries, we have the Company Law Directive, of which the initial version was published in 1968, which regulates on a European level the fact that you have to have a register of companies, so limited liability companies. There is it's all about companies with share capital, and there is a list in this directive explaining for which legal form in each of the EU countries this type of legislation is applicable. There is an obligation to disclose information, like the articles, the capital, the officers, to be able to give the transparency I already told earlier. Also here it is stipulated that all this information which is contained in this directive is public information, and people can rely on this information, and it is proof in legal proceedings. Then to say something about the international cooperation, and this was also one of the reasons I really didn't understand there was a Wiesbaden group, because I never heard of it. You see there are quite a few international organizations active which bring the registries together from different regions sometimes, but also on a global scale. There's an organization in Europe which has something like 30, 35 members, the European Commerce Register Forum. We have the Corporate Register Forum, which is a global organization, which nowadays something like 60, 65 members. IACA is in fact the organization for North America. I always tend to say that this is as international as the World Series of Baseball, because it's mainly Canada and the US, but they call it themselves international. But there is a little international part of it as well. 4 or 5 years ago, another organization started up in Latin America, and they are now also active bringing the registries together. Mainly through an annual conference like this, working groups on specific topics, and especially the European one is quite strong in that, because all the European countries are of course affected by European legislation. And if you have new legislation, as now is the case on beneficial ownership, for example, usually there is a working group formed within ECRF to bring the ideas together and to see how in the different countries such legislation can be executed in a good way for the registry itself. And what also might be interesting for you is the International Business Report, which is a document which is published now annually with lots and lots of information on how the business registers globally act, what they register, but also what the trends and developments are. And if I'm correct, in the latest version, which has been published this spring, we have information of something like 98 different jurisdictions around the world, giving information on how they function as a registry. Except from or alongside the registry associations as such, we also have a data exchange facility. The European Business Register has been established in 1992, I think, and at the moment we have 25 European registers which actually provide the data from themselves to the clients of the other 24 registries within the group, which has a very simple idea behind it. EBR itself only functions as a platform, and if you are already a client of the Swedish registry, you can still use your user ID and password to get into the website of the Swedish registry, and you can not only search for information from Sweden, but you can also search for information from Italy, the Netherlands, the UK, to be able to view the information from the registry direct. And there is also a system of exchanging payments and everything between the registries behind it, because that also means that this client from Sweden, which I mentioned, has the possibility to pay to the Swedish register in the normal way. He always pays for information there. I have a little bit of a different hat on because I'm also still the chairman of the board of the European Business Register. So we are really happy to be able to still facilitate all this kind of information exchange behind the registers, between the registers. And what you see for the last couple of years is that similar ideas are now working in Canada, in the Asian region, mainly driven by Singapore. In the Balkan countries, there is an initiative to exchange the information in more or less the same way. And also in Latin America, the registries are talking together to be able to exchange information in the same idea. Then we have BRIS. BRIS is the Business Register Interconnection System from the European Union. This comes from a project from the European registries working together in the so-called BRIGHT project, the Business Register Interconnection throughout Europe, something like that, which was a research project funded by the EU, which came up with a lot of ideas how to better work together and exchange information between the registries. This directive now makes it mandatory for the 31 EEA countries to work together as business registers and exchange information. So it changes in fact 3 existing directives. It doesn't give a new legislation as such in an entire directive. With a few general provisions. Like I said, it is now mandatory to cooperate. To do it in an electronic network, it has to be multilingual, of course, to be able to understand each other. And it also has created a unique international number, the so-called EU ID, which is in fact the local number with some information in front of it. 2 minutes. Okay, good. To make it internationally unique, like it has been done with the IBAN number for your bank account. It's the same idea, in fact. Information is available via a single platform at the moment. It has no database. It in fact has a central names index which links to the different countries behind it. There are only like 3 or 4 data elements available for free at the moment: name, number, address or city. And then you have to go to the National Business Register to find the information. One of the other very important things of this cooperation is that there is now an electronic communication available between the registries itself for the information on branches in another country and on cross-border mergers. It is available via the e-justice portal. I think there are like 25 countries operational at the moment. It was mandatory to be operational June last year, but not everybody made that. And it is also important to realize that because this is based on the First Company Law Directive, it only contains information on companies, which is like 45% of all the information available in the registries of these 31 countries, because many countries register much more than just companies. And they still have a little bit of a problem there that there is no payment system available, so everything has to be arranged with the local registry. Final slide. What do we do as GLIVE with the registries? Because I like to make the connection between the GLIVE world and the business register world. There is quite a close cooperation, I would say, between us, between the local operating units, which are the organizations which actually issue the LEI. Claire will talk about that later more, and the business register, because, I mean, in the reference data of an LEI, you do have to have the official data of a company, which usually comes from the official business registry in a country. This is also the reason why we have published these, what we call the RA list, the Registration Authorities list, which has data on more than 650 registration authorities from around the world, so that local operating units, but also everybody else, can find registration authorities in these countries. We already have 5 European business registers which are active as an LEU, which issue legal entity identifiers to companies, and we are talking to more to involve them into the system as well. And of course, we think this is a really important cooperation to strengthen for the future. That was it.
Thank you, Rico. Rico. A question.
Are there any questions?
Andrew?
Thank you. Could I, a slightly tangential question perhaps, but you did mention branches, and I do find interest in the concept of a branch in the business registries world, and all EU countries seem to have branches. Why is it that we allow the concept of a branch to exist when it is really facilitates tax avoidance, really? Can you explain a little bit more about the concept?
I'm not a politician, so that's a hard question to answer, why we allow that. I guess because we don't put limitations on what you can do with a company and to have branches in your own country, but also abroad. But I can give you a little bit of background on why we came to the idea that we needed really better communication on branches. The Bright project ran from 2006 onwards for 2 or 3 years. And around that time, one of the things we discovered was that like I think 10% of all new registrations in the business register in Germany were branches of UK limited companies. And that was, of course, because it was so easy to establish a UK limited company, especially if you compare it to the hassle in Germany to establish a new company there, that many people, and especially many advisors, of course, chose to have this route of using a branch of a UK limited company instead of establishing your own company. But many of them didn't realize that it also means that you have to abide by the UK laws to renew your data every year, to pay your annual fee, etc., etc. And the legal system in the UK is that it is up to the registrar of companies to incorporate your company, but also terminate your company if you don't play by the rules. Which meant that we found at that time that 15% of all the branches of UK companies in Germany didn't have a mother anymore, because that company was terminated by the registrar in the UK, which actually meant that the branch in Germany didn't have any legal personality anymore. They were not aware of it, because they were just ignoring, apparently, the communication from Companies House in the UK. Which, of course, meant that there was quite a big legal gap between reality and an official position, which meant that in the end, in this bridge directive, we incorporated something like that to be able to inform each other much better, which means that there is now like a kind of trigger mechanism available, which means that if you get a trigger from, in this case, the UK, that according to your local legislation in Germany or wherever, you go to that branch and you tell them, guys, listen, you don't exist anymore. How are you going to handle that? Yes.
Okay, well, sorry. Fabio, do you have a question or a very short question? And Rico, please, a very short answer.
Okay.
Yeah, very short question. As you are an expert in this matter, we have now the system of BRIS. What would be the new or the future plan for developing? Because the system is, we can say, half of the system, because there is just few elements that are exchanged, but what are the new feature or the plans?
Okay. It's always dangerous when people call you an expert, because then they expect a good answer. I'm not on the European Commission, so I have a little bit of difficulty of saying something like that, but first of all, they still need to arrange their payment system. They need to get everybody online. They are now talking about some changes in the company law directives to make more information available for free, but also to make many more steps in the whole process of establishing and growing your company in a digital way, make it mandatory for all European countries to do much more online instead of on, you could say, paper forms as they're doing now. Short enough?
Yes, short enough.
Good.
Thank you, Rico, and I would call Oliver to the stand.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I hope it will work. Yes, no, yes. Yes, thank you. So I am going to make the presentation about the French business register for the economic restructuring. It's not a new business register, but in France, we decided to lead a reengineering process of our business register because we wanted to improve the quality and the timeliness of our data about restructuring. In parallel, Eurostat set up an early warning system, and they wanted to obtain as soon as possible a lot of information about restructuring of the multinational groups. And we hope that our new business register will help us to answer to Eurostat. So, the outline of my presentation. First, I will try to explain what we are really talking about. Then I will give you an overview of Citrus. Citrus is the name of our new business register. I will explain the Citrus workflow, the main contribution of the administrative data, because the administrative data is the core of our system, because it's thanks to this administrative data that we will have up-to-date data. And then I will explain you the Citrus output. To finish, I will give you an example on how we can take into account the enterprise in Citrus. Because as you can see, we will have all the information at the legal unit level, but what we want is to disseminate information at the enterprise level. So, what is an economic restructuring? It's a transfer of activity between legal units, or it's a transfer of assets. The most common cases are the absorption. So we have at the beginning 2 legal units, and at the end only one still exists, the only one disappears. And another example is the merger, or the scission, or the partial contribution of assets. That is the most common case. For example, the legal unit X cell is one establishment to the legal unit Y, and so they have an exchange of assets. That's economic restructuring, but what are they important for statisticians? It's important when you want to produce longitudinal studies, because the economic restructuring can generate atypical and temporal evolution. And if you want to produce sectoral analysis, you have to take into account the restructuring to explain the change from a year to another, because the restructuring can blur the message for sectoral analysis. Now, let me give you an example. For example, in 2016, you have 2 legal units. The legal unit, is it work? Yes. The legal unit 4 and 1. And the legal unit 4 belongs to the sector B, so the main activity code is B, and the main activity code of the legal unit 1 is A. In 2017, they merged together, and we appear the legal unit 14, but the legal unit 14 belongs to the sector A. So when you will produce statistics, in 2016, you will have the legal unit 4 in the sector B, so it realized about 500 kilo euro of turnover. But in 2017, this turnover disappears from the sector B and appear in the sector A, even if the economic activity don't change during the 2 years. That's why we can say that the restructuring will blur the message. And I will try to explain how we will deal with this issue. In France, when we produce statistics, for example, SBS statistics, we give 2 kinds of information. First, we can give the level of statistics, for example, the total turnover of car construction. But we give also information about the evolution. We can say that from the previous year, the total turnover increase or decrease of X%. Okay, so there's 2 kinds of information. And when we want to give information about the evolution, we decompose the evolution into 4 populations, because it depends on the evolution depends on the population, and the politic that you must lead depends on the impact of each population. For example, the first population is the sustainable enterprise, so the enterprise that were present in the previous year and that are still present in the year. And we can see that if their turnover decreases a lot, we must help them. But if the sector decreases because of the business demography, for example, it's not the same policy that you have to lead. So the business demography is the second population that we learn. The third population is the inflows and outflows, so enterprise that change their main activity code from a year to another. These 3 types of information are still in our business register. But the 4th category that interests us are the legal unit or the enterprise that have restructuring process. And this information is not in our statistical business register. That's why we decided to create one specific for this topic. So the name, as I said before, Citrus is our business register. The role of Citrus is to collect administrative data about the restructuring and then to create a new statistical unit called envelope. And the role of the envelope is to neutralize the effects of the restructuring. I will explain it after. The envelope contains all the legal units that belong to the restructuring phase, and it tries to produce, in the same structure, data from the previous year and from the reference year. I will give you an example. I come back to my example. So in this example, the envelope I will create will contain the legal unit 14 for the year 2017, and the two legal unit 4 and 1 for the previous year. And I will give this information, for example, for our SBS survey. And what they will do, they will create SBS data for the envelope. So for the year 2017, the data of the envelope will be equal to the data of the legal unit 14. But for the previous year, the data of the envelope will be the sum of the information of the legal unit 4 and 1. And with this envelope, they will put the envelope in their data editing process, and they can do temporal test and temporal check. But without the envelope, they can't do that because they have only the legal unit 14, and they have no information about it for the previous year, so they can't do temporal check. So the workflow of Citrus, Citrus has three main sources. The most important is the BODAC, as I will explain just after. It's the administrative data source. And we have other sources, which are statistical source, the SBS survey, and other surveys. And what we can do is that Citrus gives the information from the BODAC, but from the SBS survey, it gives some information, but it gives back the envelope to the data editing process, as I explained before. And then after that, after Citrus collects all this information, it's sent to Cirrus. Cirrus is our own national statistic business register. So at the end, in Cirrus, we know the list of legal units that are in restructuring, and we can use it to explain our evolution. And there is an interface for the users to direct our information in the Citrus database. So I come back to the administrative source. So it's an official bulletin of civil and commercial advertisement. In France, when the legal unit has modification of their structure, they have to declare this modification to the administration. So all this administration, this modification is registered in the Trade and Legal Units Register. And this information are coming from the Chamber of Commerce of the commercial courts. And INSEE downloads, so the National Statistics Institute, download every day XML files from this open data website to catch the information about the restructuring. The problem is that every year, this administrative source have about 2 million data, 2 million data. And we count 2 million announcements, sorry. But at the end, there is only one person that concerned the restructuring. So we have the first job is to identify the announcement that concern economic restructuring. And that's a big job. We use some keywords to do that, but it's a very, very difficult job. But when we identify the announcement, the second job is to find the information that are useful for us. And the most important information are the identifier of the legal unit that are in this restructuring. And with this information, we verify that the legal unit belongs to our statistical business register, and if yes, we can create a restructuring process in Citrus, and we will keep other information about this couple of legal units. We want to find the type of restructuring first, then the date of the restructuring, and the end, the amount exchanged between the two legal units. This administrative source is very important for us because it gives us 77% of the legal unit in restructuring, and it gives us a very up-to-date information because 60% of the total number of the BODAC information are known later than 30 days after the decision date. And that's very new for us because with our previous system, we do not have as up-to-date information as today. And with the previous register, the information about restructuring can be used for short-term statistics. But now, with this register, as we can see that 30 days after we know about 60% of the restructuring, we can give this information to the short-term statistics, and they can use it to check their data. And this, as you can see, this information will be very useful for the early warning system too. So the other source, as I said before, we have a SBS survey, because in this survey we have a part of the questionnaire which contains questions about the restructuring, and the main apport of the SBS survey is the amount of the transfers, because sometimes in the BODAC we do not have this information. The other surveys, there are no specific questions about the restructuring, but sometimes when the clerks contact the enterprise to check their answer, they can have information about the restructuring process of the enterprise, and they give this information to Citrus. At the end, what Citrus gives to the other users is Citrus provides 3 types of outputs. The first thing is the list of legal units which participate to a restructuring process. This information will be sent to our National Statistical Business Register. It contains the amounts exchanged during the restructuring, so that is very useful to calculate the real investment of the legal units. And at the list, we have information about the envelopes data. What are this data? As I said before, there's 2 kinds. The most important rules to create envelope is that one legal unit belongs to one and only one envelope for a given year. This rule allows us to constitute the envelopes and to give this information to the users. So what are these information? The first one is the perimeter on the envelope, so the legal unit that exists before the restructuring phase, and this information will be useful to calculate the data of the previous year on the list of legal units that exist after the restructuring phase, the restructuring process, and this information will be useful to calculate the data of the reference year for the envelopes. Another point which is very important is the NACE code, because for each envelope, Citrus calculates a NACE code that's very necessary if you want to produce sectorial statistics. And at the end, Citrus calculates an aggregation coefficient. This coefficient, the role of this coefficient is to neutralize the flow that appears or disappears before and after the restructuring. As we have seen before, the legal unit 1 and 4 make some exchange, because the legal unit 1 sell about, in our example, about, I remember, 100 kilo euro to the legal unit 4. But after the restructuring, as the 2 legal units form only one legal unit, this flow disappears, because this flow is internal of the new legal unit, so it disappears from the market. So we have to eliminate it if you want to make a comparison between the 2 years that is consistent. Now, to finish, our last challenge is to produce envelope at the enterprise level. Because, as I said before, all the information that we have about the restructuring concern the legal unit. And in this example, for example, we have in red, we have the legal unit that are in restructuration, so the envelope are in red. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 envelope. And in blue one, we have the perimeter of the enterprise. And if the legal units are alone, they are independent, and we can consider them as an enterprise. So what you can see, there are different types of envelopes. Some envelopes can be within an enterprise, or between some enterprise, or between only the independent legal unit. So that's the view when you consider the legal unit. But if you want to produce a statistic at the enterprise level, you have to modify your envelope, and what the information you obtain at the end is as follows. The envelope that was within an enterprise disappear, because the enterprise consolidate all the information, and the envelope which concerns the independent legal unit don't change, it's always the same, and we can merge the other envelopes because we follow the same rule. One enterprise must belong to only one envelope. Okay. So to conclude, Citrus provides a lot of information about restructuring, and as we saw before, it's very important when you want to produce longitudinal statistics and to explain the evolution of a sector. So Citrus allows us to improve the relevance of our temporal evolution. It allows to improve the relevance of our temporal control of the survey data. So the envelope is very useful for our data editing process. And it improves the quality of the investment because we know the real part of the investment. And as I said at the beginning, for us, it will be very helpful to answer to the early warning system. And if we can do that, it's because we can obtain very up-to-date information. And if we can have this information, it's thanks to the use of the administrative source, which is very important in our system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Questions? Ronald.
Thank you, Oliver, for this information. Yes, interesting. My question is about, so just to, and I think you made that point, but just to emphasize, so this kind of information is being used as a kind of metadata for explanation, or do you actually also foresee this in some kind of revision of time series to have this information in there? Thank you.
No, we use it. We do not do revision because every year what we can produce is, for example, the total turnover of the car construction for the year 2016 and for the year 2017. You can make comparison between the two, and then the evolution is about 10%. So okay, it's the reality if you compare only the two aggregate. According to this information, what we will do is to decompose this information and say, okay, it's an evolution of 10%, but X% is due to the restructuring. But we won't modify our data. We will just explain them better.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that you receive a lot of data from the court registers, announcements about the restructuring. Which sources do you use to elaborate this data, to have results, final results?
So at the beginning, we have the administrative source, and then we can make links between the legal unit. And after that, we aggregate the results of the legal unit that we have in our business register. The data coming from the administrative source allows us only to make the links between the legal unit that are in restructuring. After that, we use the data about the legal unit that we are in our business register or that we are in the SBS survey and so on.
Okay, well, thank you, Olivier. Now we will have a joint presentation by the Swiss Federal Office. Sam Banat and Camille Gonzet will present. You will not have the double time.
Hi, good morning, everybody. We will present first results of the works in microdata linkage, and especially in the context of macroeconomic indicators. The presentation is structured in 5 parts. First, I will quickly review the context and the frameworks of the analysis carried out in the field of microdata linkage and the value for macroeconomic indicators. Then I will talk about the characteristics of the data, and I will present the first case study before giving the word to my colleague Camille Gonzet for the 2nd case study and the general conclusions. So these analyses take place in the context of evolving economic structures and the fragmentation of global value chains. One must in particular consider phenomena like globalization and digitalization. At the same time, we face rising demands for more and more statistics with a constant pressure to reduce burden on respondents. During the last years, we have taken a new approach for statistical production by using more and more administrative data in our processes. In this context, the introduction of the unique enterprise identification number, the UID, offers a great opportunity. And naturally, we cooperate more closely with administrative data producers, especially custom and value-added tax authorities. It is important to state that all this work is based on the concepts of national accounts. Here, the Bible is the so-called System of National Account, SNA, which is a reference framework for the production of GDP and macroeconomic indicators. Besides, we are also interested in structural analysis of the Swiss economy. Given this background, we are interested in two basic questions. First, can administrative data be used to complement existing data or generate new data? And second, could it even replace survey data? We try to answer these issues through two case studies, which focus on the one hand on the comparison between VAT turnover and the turnover collected in surveys, and on the other hand, on the results of case study based on the linkage between custom declarations and the business registers. Let me first give a few indications of the characteristics of the data. Administrative data is available since 2008, and it was introduced in the business register in 2011. This work, what do we have? On the whole, for 2/3 of all firms, turnover is the original value provided by the firms. For 1/3 of the firms, the turnover is missing and is given by estimations like imputation and distributions. This is the case, for example, for firms that are not subjected to VAT by law. One can point out here that the information provided by VAT authorities may contain weakness when considered from a statistical perspective, as quality controls are mainly based on fiscal criteria. Contrary to VAT data, custom data have a well-established tradition in statistical production. For example, international merchant trade statistics. They also produce new products like the trade by enterprise characteristics, thanks to the use of the UID and the linkage with business register. These data are very interesting for domains like foreign affiliate statistics. This linkage to the business register offers a large number of information, for example, the value of imports or exports, or the product descriptions, etc. My colleague will give further details on this when he will present the second case study. The purpose of the first case study is to analyze and compare the two sources of turnover. One is provided by VAT data, the other is provided by the production and value-added statistics called WV survey. First, we see that in general, the administrative VAT turnover is higher than the survey turnover, but there are some substantial differences in various branches. In the graphic, we see in blue bar the ratio of VAT turnover over WV turnover for each economic branch. It gives useful insight on the gap. The red dot indicates the ratio of sectoral shares in total turnover. It shows for each activity the difference of relative weight. So when it's equal to 1, the two turnover are identical. When it's higher than 1, it means that the VAT turnover is higher than the WV turnover. and between 0 and 1, the VAT is lower than the WV. On the graphic on the right-hand side, we see the figure for the whole economy. Here, the total is comparable in the two sources. However, this picture differs significantly when we look at more detailed level. For example, one can see that even if in the service sector, the VAT turnover is generally higher than the WV turnover, the weight of service sector in VAT is lower than in WV sector. And we can also see that some activity differs substantially, like in the branch human health and social work activities. But generic elements help to understand these main differences. First of all, the way enterprises complete the tax declaration is a systematical issue. They often indicate elements that, like subsidies, which should not be considered at all. This leads to an overestimation to real turnover, and it concerns activities like manufacture of food products or R&D, education, or even human health and social work activities. The turnover of branches with special activities, for example, trading in precious metal and electricity sector, and electricity sector and gambling and bets activities is often very different, as the one, the W survey, consider only a margin, while the other source takes into account the gross figures. In case of groups, one may say that turnover is in general higher than WV. Turnover is in general higher in WV than in VAT because in VAT data are already consolidated. That means that internal flows and transactions are netted, so the value-added tax is levied on these flows. Thus, subsequent reallocation on units, which are member of groups, leads to underestimated turnover. It's especially the case for the wholesale sector. Last but not least, some specific element could explain the gap in some branches. The imputation method can play a role in the gap of some sector. The original value is of poor quality. The statistical imputation method thus also give relatively bad results. It is particularly the case for education or social work activities. In specific branches, a major role can be played by the supplies exempted from tax. For example, in the sector of education, this effect is much higher than the effect of subsidies. That's why the turnover in this branch is lower in VAT than in WV. In the sector of health, it's mainly the weakness of WV turnover, which explains the gap. Indeed, only a small part of the branch is surveyed, and important data is missing, like, for example, turnover of hospitals or doctors. That's all for the first case study. Now I leave the floor to Camille for the second case study.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Sam, for giving me the floor. So now I will present you the second case study. And now, actually, we will switch from VAT to customs data. And also the aim of this case study is completely different, actually. We would like to see whether we can use administrative data and microdata linking in order to see whether we can gain some insights on the business models and activities and behaviors of firms of a particular sector. In this case, we analyzed the manufacture of basic metals sector because actually Switzerland hosts some of the biggest precious metals refineries in the world. And therefore, the case study that I will present to you now is somehow very specific to Switzerland because of the presence of these refineries. Also, I will base my analysis first on customs data, and then I will also link customs data with other data sources in order to try to analyze more in details two special firms. So now on slides 13 and 14, actually you have two tables that present gross trade figures for 6 firms or 6 precious metals refineries in Switzerland. If you look at column 3, it's very interesting to see